So we have a pretty great panel today. So first off, we have Finch Fulton, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy at USDOT. We have Jamie Boone, Director of Technology and Innovation Policy at Toyota North America. And then we have Luke Fox, who's the CEO of White Fox Defense Technologies. And then I am Matt Furlow. I'm the Policy Director here over at CTech. So without further ado, I will kind of kick it off to, actually, I'll first start with an overview of the white paper. So in kind of in conjunction with this Chamber's UAS and AV working groups, we put together a future of transportation white paper, which focused on UAS, UAM, and automated vehicles. I know there's many other really important other transportation topics, but these are the three that we really wanted to take a deep dive in on. For UAS, much of our focus was on ensuring that there's a permanent regulatory framework under Part 107 and other areas to regulate UAS, with remote ID being a critical function to underpin all of that. We also focused on UAS security issues such as counter-drone technologies and 2209 protecting critical infrastructure. In addition, we focused on areas such as U.S. competitiveness in emerging aviation, highlighting the importance of standards, the importance of research and development and public partnerships to build U.S. competitiveness and strengthen the domestic defense industrial base. In addition, we had a strong focus on ensuring effective governance of emerging aviation technology, so having a strong federal role to regulate UAS and UAM, and also being wary of concerns from state and local governments who seek to regulate this technology. And then on UAM, this is the first time that the Chamber has weighed in publicly on UAM issues. And our two main areas of focus there were trying to prod policymakers to establish a regulatory framework for UAM, and also consider the various infrastructure concerns and challenges that are required to effectively deploy UAM in the future. Finally, on automated vehicles, we highlighted the importance of ensuring a strong national framework for automated vehicle technology, both through legislative and regulatory pathways, focusing on the various roles of federal, state, and local governments, as well as kind of modernizing regulations through updating FMCSRs and FMVSSs. In addition, we looked at alternatives to regulation, such as standards processes and other public-private partnerships. Finally, we focused on educating consumers and the public on automated vehicles, which is essential to ensure public trust in the technologies. PAVE organization is a great example of that, where stakeholders come together to, have rides for consumers and kind of educate on the limitations and uses of AVs, and also the AV test initiative that DOT has recently introduced that helps show and provides transparency to where AV testing is occurring. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more different policy ideas on all three of these topics throughout. So I'll kind of kick it off to each of the panelists. So Finch, I'll start with you for your opening statement.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that the report seems to be okay with the department's been taking the past 4 years. I didn't hear any recommendations that I objected to, so looking forward to working with you all on those items. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here. It is a very important time for us as we reflect on what has been accomplished in the first term of this administration, which will springboard us into what we're planning to do in the second term. So under Secretary Chow, the department, as we look at the innovation portfolio, essentially broken up into 4 key areas: automated vehicles, commercial space, drones, and then some of the net council activities that we've got going on. Her approach that she communicates to us and to the outside world is, we've got to remain technology neutral, focusing on partnering with innovators to prioritize safety, not a top-down or command or control directive. And you hear this again and again and again from her, because as she says, eventually we'll listen. So we've taken, if we look at automated vehicles first, we've put out guidance documents 2.0, which focused on safety as the cornerstone for all the activities we built out on. We talk about collaboration and transparency. You mentioned things like the voluntary self-safety assessments, the AV test initiative, some of these activities that partners can take place in to prove safety to the public, to us, and to the Congress. 3.0 we put out, that was the first multimodal guidance document that really clarified the role of the state, local, and federal government, as well as the private sector, and gave confidence to the sector that unlocked billions of dollars of investments. We heard directly from the innovators that that certainty that this guidance document provided really unlocked the funding for them. And then last year, or actually the beginning of this year, we released AV 4.0, which aligned the 38 federal agencies that are working on automated vehicle technologies, that have the authorities, that are investing billions of dollars in research, in the basic research and the technologies that make these systems work. We aligned everybody on a certain set of principles and clarified the government's approach. And so in our time here, we've invested $230 million through more than 300 research projects, including 91 project areas that we've got underway now, focus on safety and demonstrations, crash assurance, things like that, the basics of the technology. But more importantly, in the last 4 years, we've granted permission and temporary authorities for about 90 automated driving system equipped vehicles for testing in limited demonstrations in over 20 states. So around the world, we're seeing 1,200 testing activities going on. Half of them are happening in the US, in 40 states and in DC. I mean, you're seeing American innovators taking steps leading the world in the development of these technologies, following all laws and guidance. You see Waymo removing the driver. You see these exemption or these petitions in California and elsewhere. You see the Department of Transportation issuing an exemption petition for these neuro passengerless delivery vehicles. And that's really where we are really laying out the future. We'll be able to talk about later on the types of data we're looking for, the types of operations we seek to enable, and our path forward. Briefly touching on a few other areas. With commercial space, we have reorganized how we operate. We've dedicated an Office of Spaceport Policy. We've focused a Center of Excellence on safety for space transportation, and we just last week issued a new launch and reentry rule to really streamline how these space launch operations can happen in the future. We've retaken the world lead in the launch of these technologies, so the US is back at #1. We're at about 40 launches this year that we should hit. The number was going to be closer to 50, but things have happened this year. But that is ahead of China and ahead of Russia, our near-peer competitors. When we look, and that number is going to keep getting better in years to come. We're going to talk more about drones later, but obviously the drone integration pilot program has been wildly successful, really changing the culture of the FAA, giving them what they needed, the clarity, the guidance, the resources to be able to get to yes on these operations, working with these partners, unlocking thousands of different types of operations. They've approved over 8,500 waivers, exemptions, and authorities for these operations. We got to make it more routine and crisper and get better, but we have done a lot of work, and that's led into the remote ID rule, which is at OIRA, as well as the Ops Over People rule, which is also at OIRA. We intend to get both of those done by the end of the year, and then pivot all of our will, all of our focus, and all of our efforts on the next big thing, which is beyond visual line of sight. That's going to really open up the operations and capabilities and the promise of these technologies. And the last thing I'll touch on is the NET Council that Secretary Chow established, the Non-Traditional Emerging Transportation Technology Council. As different innovators come to the department, they don't really know who to talk to or how to deal with these technologies. The Secretary created a platform for us to work intermodally on these technologies, provide clarity, guidance, and in some cases resources to develop standards. A couple months ago, we published our Pathways to the Future of Transportation document, which among other things focused on providing clarity for Hyperloop systems. And what we've seen is, just like we saw with AB 3.0 and some of these other documents, we've already seen a $500 million investment from the private sector, not with taxpayer dollars, on a testing and certification center in West Virginia for these technologies. I mean, it's happening today. We're seeing the progress being made. And by focusing on the federal role, providing that guidance, partnering with innovators, and working together as a whole, we've been able to unlock just billions of dollars of investments in American innovation. So we're very proud of the work we've been doing and looking forward to doing it for many years into the future.
Thank you, Finch. We appreciate your leadership and the Secretary's leadership on all of these issues. I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Great, thanks, Matt. Thank you, and thank you to CTEC for hosting this event today. The future of transportation really is all about mobility, right? And mobility is about the freedom of movement, the ability to move when you want, where you want, how you want. And Toyota really is taking that to heart and transforming into not just, going from an automaker, but to a mobility company. This is about so much more than just cars and roads. So that's a huge and important part of it. It's about, amplifying intelligence and creating tools to help people get to where they need to go, whether that is on the roads, in air, or in your house. It's enhancing the human experience of mobility and giving people freedom and independence for longer. And we hear people talk a lot about CASE. Toyota thinks about it as chase. So the future is connected. It is about human-centered services. It is about automation, shared mobility, and electrification, and all of those things coming together and working together to really amplify that experience and create the mobility for people that need it the most. That's why Toyota has been engaged, in R&D on the automated vehicle side, on connected vehicles, and V2X communications, on automated mobility as a service with the e-pallet that we debuted at CES a couple of years ago. And then robotics. We have a lot of really cool things going on at our Toyota Research Institute on home human robots and how they can help amplify the human experience. And advanced air mobility with our partnership with Joby Aviation, and all of those things coming together to really increase and enhance mobility for everybody.
Thank you, Jamie. Turn over to you, Luke.
Fantastic. Well, again, I'm Luke Fox, the founder and CEO of White Fox. White Fox Defense is one of the leading providers of counter UAS and drone security and autonomous technology security platforms. And so when we look at the future of transportation, one of the key pieces that we see is on top of mobility is the autonomy nature of mobility and transportation as a whole. And so one of the best examples of this of how we see the future is being able to, right now, if we look outside the window and see a drone hovering outside a window, if we see a car without somebody in it drive up and park right in front of our house, there's this natural sense of anxiety and fear and question. Why is it here? What's it doing? Who's driving? Who does it belong to? And how can we do something about it if it's doing something wrong? And so as we look into the future of transportation, it is going to be not just autonomy, but truly trusted autonomy. How can we enable us to feel that sense of trust? And that comes through transparency and accountability. How can we enable transparency into the autonomous technology that's going to permeate throughout our lives, as well as how can we create accountability for when someone does something recklessly or maliciously with that autonomous technology, be it drone, be it a driverless taxi on the ground or in the air. All of these key pieces of transportation are unlocked with trust.
Thank you, Luke. So I think the way that we're going to kind of structure this conversation, we're going to start in the air and then go to the ground and then have a couple of overarching questions. And then go to questions from the audience. So the first question I'm going to kind of pose to Luke is, we've seen a massive increase in the number of drones over the last 5 to 10 years, both in commercial and recreational operators. And you kind of were talking about trust in your opening statement and all that. And, I think, as a counter drone company, you guys have a really strong sense of how to address trust and how to address potential threats that unmanned aircraft can pose. Can you kind of go a little further into that, kind of discuss the type of threats that you're seeing and what are some different technological and policy options to help mitigate that?
Absolutely. So drones right now are the most prevalent autonomous technology in transportation, and they serve as the example. And if we do it wrong with drones, we're going to screw up the rest of this. And so drones are the perfect case study for everything that follows. So as we look at drones, they have been commoditized. They are powerful and highly accessible, easy to buy, easy to fly. And that means people are using them recklessly and maliciously, while at the same time, people are trying to use them for so many good things. And so when people use them right now, they're being used to deliver drugs into prisons over borders. People are attaching explosives to them overseas as well as domestically in the United States. They're being used for a lot of malicious purposes, as well as just disrupting. They're flying near airports and shutting airports down, flying over games. If anyone saw the Cubs game recently, where a drone landed on the field, shut down the game. And so all of this being said, in order to promote the good use of drones, we have to determine how do we prevent the bad? How can we create that transparency and accountability into drone operations? And in order to unlock drones, there's a few things that we as policymakers and as technology providers we need to do. One is we need to have the regulatory action that prevents drones from flying near sensitive sites, critical infrastructure. This was done through Congress with Section 2209 as part of the FAA's reauthorization. Now the FAA and other regulatory bodies need to take the next step in releasing an NPRM on this. And two, policymakers need to ensure that we implement the full purview of the Preventing Emerging Threats Act that enables different agencies to test counter drone technology, to ensure that that counter drone technology can as quickly as possible be adopted into airports, into nuclear power plants, into prisons, into stadiums, to ensure that they're properly safe and secure against rogue drone actors so that the good drones can fly. That's the only path forward in there. And three, counter drone authorities must be expanded to non-federal government stakeholders and entities. It is a great thing that DHS, FBI have the authority to use counter drone authorities, but Congress needs to move to expand those authorities to state, local, tribes, and territories to be able to ensure the public can be safe from the malicious use of drones. And fourth, finally, policymakers and as technology providers who must think about how can we ensure that counter drone authority and all types of measures put in place to reduce the unauthorized drones is doing so in a way that ultimately opens up the benefit of drones so that we as a society can see the full potential that drones offer to make our lives simple, better, and easier.
Thank you. Much appreciated. And I think moving forward and kind of you discussed 2209 and earlier, I think, remote ID and ops over people mentioned. So I have a question for you, Finch. I know you've taken, and this administration's taken a number of regulatory actions to enable expanded operations for UAS that both enhance safety and security. Kind of looking forward into 2021 and beyond, what are some of the key kind of regulatory actions that that should be high on the priority list kind of moving forward?
Yeah, well, hearing Luke, of course, the conversation's like, oh God, what are we doing? Why are we even letting these things in the sky? But of course, what we've got is an approach that's been built on aviation safety. And as we look to increase the safety and security of these systems, we have to make sure we build upon what works and mitigate the risks that are in the sky today. So I agree on the focus on safe and secure facilities. We've obviously provided a great amount of technical assistance and have worked with Congress on the shaping of that legislation. Understand that we've had just years and years of work on remote ID, working with the executive committee, of working with our sister agencies on how that should look. It has been just a mountain of work to get that across the finish line, and it's not across the finish line yet. And our approach to safe and secure facilities, our approach to things like counter drone technologies, working with DHS, our approach to all these things has to be shaped on remote ID and ops over people. So we got to get that done first because that shapes the way we can do the rest of the activities we have planned. So as we look at all of these things, so we have 1.7 million drone pilots in the U.S. now. We're seeing many small businesses be created to be able to commercially enable these operations and to use these types of drones for business purposes. It's unlocking millions of dollars in economic opportunities, and it's making people's lives better. I mean, you talked about what drones can deliver. We're seeing them be used to deliver personal protective equipment. We're seeing them be used to deliver medicine. We're seeing when we get appropriate waivers, which we work on as well, they're delivering organs, they're delivering medical goods, they're saving lives today through the pilot program to deliver medical devices to people where they are on the roadways, not waiting until a person gets to the hospital. So the lives are being saved today just through the types of operations we've enabled. But as we look to pivot to the future, we've learned a lot of lessons. So if you look at some of the three key rulemakings that enable operations, you've got Part 91, which is just generally the rule for general flight operations. You've got Part 107, which Matt talked a lot about, the rules around small UAS. And you've got the Part 135, air carrier and operation certificates. So for the FAA, their mandate by Congress is that they have to control the sky. It's not enough to permit. I'm going to mute Nathan. It's not enough to permit, sorry, somebody's thing was going off. It's not enough to permit things in the airspace. The FAA is required to control the airspace, which is a monumental difference in how you have to approach things versus the delegated authorities you have between the federal government and state and local governments for things like automated vehicles. So because they have to control that airspace, they have to do a type certification on the types of vehicles that are allowed. They have to do airworthiness certification. They have to, especially now, give permission for the types of operations that can happen, where they can happen, who can work on the aircraft, who can fly the aircraft, who can maintain the aircraft. All of this must be controlled by the FAA, which just makes such a mountain of work to get to where we need to be. So what we found is through the IPP and through our 9 partners that we've had success working with, not only have we seen success for things like package delivery in places like Virginia and North Carolina that are really leading the world in these operations, regardless of what other nations say, this is where the most comprehensive and integrated operations are happening, but also in places like Utah that aren't partners of ours. We're seeing approvals for things like Amazon, Google's Wing, these sort of package delivery drones are being certified now for the first time ever. And so we're enabling these operations. And by bringing all of these resources to bear that have sort of been scattered to address all of these questions around, and by bringing them all together to focus on the beyond visual line of sight rulemaking, we're bringing the resources together, bringing the partners around the country, bringing the will on getting that rulemaking done, because that's going to be the next key enabler. Being able to do that safely in a scalable, repeatable, affordable way, that's the great unlocking for these technologies, and that's what will lead to widespread package delivery, widespread infrastructure inspection, the widespread use cases where the benefits of these technologies are so profound.
Thank you, Finch. Much appreciated. So I think, Luke, we've talked about some of the regulatory or barriers and also some of enablers, but also want to have a larger conversation on U.S. kind of global competitiveness in UAS. I know we've heard a lot about, how does the U.S. drone industry doing compared to other countries, especially, China. So how, in your view, as an American company, how do you view the drone competitive landscape right now, and what are some actions that policymakers can take to enhance U.S. competitiveness in drones?
Absolutely. As Finch mentioned, ultimately the path forward is by enabling the good use of drones and ensuring that drones can have the greatest positive impact on our lives. And so as we look at that specifically, the United States is right now a leader and needs to remain a leader in that and ensure that we can maintain that competitiveness. And so in order to do so, we need a comprehensive strategy laid out from the federal government, and with support of industry, that helps to align the entire United States on each piece of each factor, not just the drone manufacturers, but all of the components. How do we ensure that everything boosts the American economy and ensures that our overall strategy is effective at moving us into a strong competitive standpoint? So one is that. Second is increasing the overall our emerging aviation technologies through policy making that strengthens the domestic industrial base. This means making targeted investments and ensuring that American leadership is shown both directly in what we're doing in the United States as well as through international standards. This is something that at White Fox we prioritize and ensure that we are helping with those standards, such as ASTM International, as well as many different standards organizations out there, such as CTA, et cetera. And finally, when we look at the country of origin restrictions that are often discussed, we need to be wary of those because they're often overly broad and restrictive. That does not address the real problem. The real problem is cybersecurity and ensuring that we have a robust cybersecurity standard. This is something that at White Fox and Precision Hawk is leading the way with Consumer Technology Association to ensure that we have a robust UAS cybersecurity standard that ensures that no matter where the drone is built, it is secure and safe to be able to be used. And of course, subsidizing and favoring U.S. developers for specific applications such as U.S. government or other sensitive applications makes a lot of sense when you're investing that purchasing power. And finally, ensuring that we have competitiveness by enabling advanced operations within the United States, as Finch shared, having that competitiveness here in the United States, ensuring that we remain a leader in that by enabling remote ID, flights over people, flight at night, as well as ensuring that we have enforcement of the rules that are in place through counter drone technology, broadly being able to use by public safety organizations across the country.
Thank you. A lot of work ahead on this issue. Our final question on aviation, I'm going to direct towards Finch, and it's not going to be on drones. We're going to do a little bit of focus on urban air mobility. So Finch, obviously, urban air mobility will significantly improve our transportation system and improve the transportation of goods and people. And I know that we're kind of in the early stages of figuring out what the regulatory framework for UAM would look like. But what are some of the key building blocks in DOT's view, how to kind of enable UAM moving forward?
Yeah, well, I like the approach that some people have taken in describing it, in that when you get to where you can deliver packages, well, you start improving the safety and security and reliability of those systems. Maybe you can start putting people on those bigger, more equipped package delivery drones. That seems to be the approach some are taking. We've got about 30 different types of active UAS type certificate, people going through the process for different iterations of ways they can do this. Some are more like helicopters, eVTOLs, that may be electrified, and because the motors are different, they can set them up in different ways so that they don't have the same noise profiles as your traditional helicopters. Others do very much look like different iterations of the passenger delivery drones, either with the horizontal wings that can pivot or just with your quadcopter type approach. So we're seeing different approaches to them, but I guess what's important is they're real, right? We have 3 of them today that have already gotten Part 135 certificates. And it's funny because people don't think of it as a real thing, but when you tell them, like, well, some of them are just different types of helicopters and those have been around for quite some time, they're like, oh yeah, I guess that's true, huh? But what we're saying is, by using, to some extent, the Part 91, the general flight rules, but the Part 135, and not really the Part 107, but to some extent, those are the approaches, those are the pathways that people are taking to develop these technologies. But some of them are also just looking at how to reduce the amount of manpower it takes to control these systems, how to make it simpler so that an amateur could one day fly these machines like a pro. Same approach that they take with the 135, right? They want to make it easier on the pilot themselves to be able to execute at a high level. So with UAM, we are taking the same crawl, walk, run approach that we take with drones. We're focusing on gradual progress, but we're not as far away as some people might think, especially with the types of operations that people are believing are coming. So we do need to focus on things like, obviously rights of way, how to get these things in the airspace. Those are approaches we can leverage off of our both manned aviation and our drone UTM, our unmanned traffic system, unmanned aerial system traffic management systems that we've developed. We can leverage those. One of the things the Net Council gets to work on is anything that's multimodal. So, where are they going to land? Or do they have the charging infrastructure that some of these systems require? Are they connected to public transit systems or rideshare services? How do you get people from point A to point B, and then they can get out of their car and go around? I mean, we're saying if you're going from Love Field to Cowboy Stadium in Dallas, that makes sense. But what if you want to go anywhere else? How do you connect to the systems? So these are real questions that we're actually looking at. And what's exciting is not only do we have the regulatory pathway to enable these operations, we should see these operations on a more widespread basis before the end of 2022. And then if you're talking about more routine operations, more refined operations, our big goal is the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. They're focusing on making sure that these vehicles can be usable, that people can take them on a number of flights for that Olympics. And the Olympics are a point of national pride. Let's use that as a focus point to make sure we can get these up, routine, safe, and enabled by the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. I think we'll be able to do it before then.
Thank you, Finch. That's a great answer. Much appreciated. So I think now we're going to be shifting from the air to the ground and focus a little bit on automated vehicles. My first question is for kind of Jamie Boone. So Jamie, automated vehicle technology, as you kind of discussed in your opening kind of remarks, it's expected to provide major benefits, safety, environmental, mobility benefits for millions of Americans. how does Toyota envision the future of automated vehicle technology? And can you kind of describe some of the key benefits that you will believe that this technology will bring to consumers and the public?
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I did talk a little bit about the benefits, the mobility benefits that Toyota sees out of these advanced vehicle technologies, whether that's automation or connected vehicles. And the safety impacts are huge. 1.25 million traffic fatalities a year worldwide is unacceptable. And we should be better than that. We should be able to really bring that number down. And a lot of the work that Toyota is doing on both our Guardian and Chauffeur systems will help accomplish that. We talked a little bit about the importance of mobility for all, and really enabling people to be able to get where they want to go when they want to go. That's automated vehicles and automated mobility as a service are huge aspects of that will really contribute to that as well. Cutting down on accidents, cuts down on traffic and congestion, and time wasted sitting behind an accident. Probably a little bit of mental health too, with the frustration that we all get when we get stuck behind an accident on the highway. But really, this is kind of a multi-pronged approach, right? There's not just one answer on what this looks like. Lots of companies and industries working on different levels of automation. Toyota is certainly working on that full level automation with our Chauffeur system that is 100%, doesn't need human oversight or human interference to operate 100% safely. But we're also working on the Guardian system, and the Guardian system is a little bit different. This is something that really is an advanced safety system that can help promote driver safety by acting almost like a guardian really for drivers that can jump in whenever a human is doing something that might lead to an accident, and help prevent it from happening, and help save lives. And that's a way to get to some of the benefits of autonomy into the system now, right? Because the full-on level 5, go wherever you want with absolutely sleeping in the back is a very long way away. But there are a lot of benefits and a lot of things that we've learned from building those systems that can apply to the vehicles that we have on the roads today. So that's really where the Guardian technology comes in. So it's really those combinations of these different projects that we're working on that give people different options, right, for getting where they want to go and when they want to get there. And I know we'll get to this a little bit later on the policy side, but that's why it's so important that we work with DOT and we work with Congress to make sure that some of these new innovative designs and technologies are able to be integrated into our vehicles to provide those safety benefits.
Thank you, Jamie. I think you did a great job kind of laying out some of those key benefits and hopefully gives everyone a stronger understanding about why we really need to take those kind of important regulatory and legislative steps to enable automated vehicle technology. So I'll turn it over to you, Finch. I know in your opening remarks, you discussed AB 4.0 and AB 3.0 and some of the other actions that the administration has taken. Can you kind of looking ahead to 2021 and beyond, what are some of the key next steps in your mind and kind of key regulatory barriers to enabling automated vehicle technology, and what are and how can DOT kind of play a constructive role in that process moving forward?
Yeah. Well, first, I was laughing at Jamie's comments. I think even my wife wouldn't feel comfortable with me as a level 5 driver driving actually myself to sleep in the back. So that tells you how far off we are from true level 5 systems. The ability to handle all situations at all times. I don't know that you have that much trust in many human drivers. But as we're working on the development approach for the performance of these systems, what you see is NHTSA's authorities relate around what can be sold in a vehicle and setting standards for that. As we look, we have many of the efforts that we've taken to date where we look to update the federal motor vehicle safety standards. You're going to see our occupant protection rule out here in the next couple of months. We're going to get that done before the end of the first term. So let me make sure my camera doesn't turn off. Before the end of the first term, we're looking at how to update our standards overall. You're going to see big rulemaking next year. But one of the ones I like to point out is our safety principles, the ANPRM, Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that NHTSA is putting out. This is where we take all of the work we've been focusing on, all the industry consensus standards, all the things we put in the appendix of AB 3.0 for how these standards work together, and we build them and show how they constructively build one on top of each other. These approaches to safety that build up to a safety case. How are innovators and how are these companies proving the safety of these systems? You're seeing some of these in VSSAs. You're seeing how we're thinking about it and constructing these arguments in like the neuro exemption petition that we put out there. But how can we build on these standards so that we can prove the safety case in a way that the public can understand, that the Congress can understand, and that we can gain confidence in for the development of the actual function of these systems in the future. So that's going to be coming out here in the next couple of months. We got to get it through OIRA and everything, and there's a lot of stuff over there now. But this is really going to be a watershed document. This is going to be the document that people point to and say, oh, this is where they figured it out, or at least started to. It's going to get comments and it's going to be refined, but this is going to be something that really sets the path forward for how we're going to think about the systems and how we're going to regulate the safety of these systems in the future. I think it's going to be something that's going to have to be flexible and performance-based, but even being able to communicate and show the massive amount of work that has gone into this to date a long way to getting that public trust that so many people see the need in. But there is more to it than that. We obviously have to prepare the infrastructure. You hear a lot of people talking about a patchwork approach across the country. We're going to have a research project that's going to be publishing here. It's looking like it's going to be January, but we still hope to get it done in the first term. Really bringing out those differences and approaches to see if there is a patchwork of concern bubbling up, or if there are issues that really aren't a problem. Some that there's gray area that we can focus on, and then some that are really true, like maybe 3 or 4 things that we actually do need to focus on, dialogues around, to make sure that we can all work together on this. We've got tons of work going on. I mentioned the research. Accessibility is going to be key for us. The Inclusive Design Challenge closes on Friday the 30th. I'm hoping that we get a lot of great applications in for that, partnering with people that actually have disabilities to create the solutions for the future that automated vehicles can bring about. So between all our focus on collaboration and transparency, things like VSSAs, AV tests, the demos and deployments we have with the automated driving system demonstration grants, connected vehicle pilot programs, things like work zone data exchanges that you may not think build into this, but as we look at data, they do build into it. Just so much stakeholder engagement on things like terminology and how do consumers understand the capabilities and limitations of these technologies, and then just more of the work on rulemakings, locking in some of the things where we've made some great guidance documents and great interpretations, but you got to lock it into rulemaking for it to be permanent. So that's where I think our focus is going to be. And I'm looking at this. I've been mocking together sort of how I'm seeing these things align. I know y'all can't read that. That's kind of the point. We're going to have this in a nice graphical format that hopefully will be in our comprehensive plan that shows how all of these things relate and shows the vision for the future that we also want to get out before the end of the first term.
Great, thank you, Finch. We're very much looking forward to kind of seeing that comprehensive plan and the safety principles. And I think you did a great job of kind of highlighting the importance of having a strong public-private sector partnership and kind of developing some of these policies and concepts moving forward.
We couldn't do that without that.
So Jamie, kind of shifting over to kind of the legislative regulatory policy side. So, as you know, we had several iterations of AB Start and automated vehicle legislation over the last few years, and none of those, unfortunately, have come to kind of fruition. So kind of looking to the 117th Congress, and how do you kind of see legislation playing out in the 117th Congress, as well as some of the kind of the regulatory challenges as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we've been through this a few times on the Hill, and gotten really close. At the end of the last Congress on a comprehensive automated vehicle bill, weren't able to quite get there. And then this session have worked closely. I think a lot of the stakeholders coming together with the committee staff, both in the Senate and in the House, to work through a lot of the issues that came up the last time and see where we can find solutions. It's always tough during an election year. You run up against a shorter deadline. We just kind of ran out of time this year. But I think the desire to still address a lot of these issues is there. both from the industry side and from the congressional side as well. So we're going to keep having those conversations, and there are just a couple of kind of key things that we continue to think about and are going to be important as we think about this approach. And some of them are more legislative, some of them are more on the regulatory side, but they really kind of, a lot of these things really work hand in hand. So you have to have both sides there. Overall, we need to, continue to focus on adapting regulations to be more flexible, to be more performance-based, to allow room for innovation, while still prioritizing and preserving safety. I think, there's a misconception out there that it's the Wild West, or that, AV developers are looking to just have no rules, get rid of the rules, and that's not the case. You can be flexible in performance without eliminating safety. So certainly, appreciate the approach that DOT has taken in recognizing that fact, and that, we don't want to get in this situation again, right? Where, 30 years down the road, we have some new innovation that we can't, and new, safety feature that we can't do anything with, because it's going to take another 20 years to get legislation or regulation adapted. So that ability to adapt is going to be really important. And, there are still, there are existing barriers that we still need to work to eliminate. Some of those at the state level with some of these, one hand on the wheel law in New York, or, some of these different requirements in different states on drivers. And when the system is the driver, that makes things a little more complicated. Updating the federal motor vehicle safety standards, which Finch talked about, and we continue to work through and push for. Increasing the number of exemptions is still a huge ask, and that's something that has to be done by Congress, right? We've talked a bit about how long the process takes to update safety standards and regulations. It's it's a comprehensive process for sure, but in the meantime, we can look at new ways to solve some of these different problems, to get new data, to test new systems with exemptions. So that's going to be really important for Congress to consider, when we look again at a bill next year. And just, speeding up the process on exemptions and considering exemptions, and really harmonizing that federal and state role. Finch, I look forward to seeing the research project that comes out on where you all are seeing the pain points and where we're seeing them. I think it's going to be really helpful in illustrating what the need is for that, because there definitely are still some areas that need that clarity from the federal government. So that's going to be really important. And then, finally, states, cities, localities are all a part of this conversation as well. It's not just the federal government or the state government. So continuing to have those conversations about, how best to integrate some of these systems into their designs and into their roadways, making sure that lane markings are consistent and well maintained, and there's good signage and traffic control devices are all things that we can do at that level, and do that now.
Thank you, Jamie. It definitely looks like kind of a very busy 2021. So I think before we have one final question, but I think a couple of folks joined as we were kind of discussing. So if you have any questions from the audience, please just type them into the chat box there, include name, affiliation, and the question, and then I'll just read that out to the participants. So I think final question to all panelists. So kind of looking to the future, we have kind of addressed drones, we addressed automated vehicles, urban air mobility to some extent, but kind of looking out in the future, are there any other emerging transportation technologies outside of those that we should be looking at? And what are some lessons learned from the conversation that we had today to kind of lay a safe, effective, and kind of secure framework for those technologies? I'll kick it over to Finch first.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question quickly. Hyperloop systems are a good example, but flipping to something that I think is just as important, the version of your question that I want to answer more, is we're seeing what's impacting our transportation trends right now. Obviously, the coronavirus had a tremendous effect. Amtrak rides are down. They're now down by 74%. Public transit is down by 63%. Aviation's not even flying half of their normal schedule. but roadways are only down 7%, and rural transit is back at normal. So we've taken a lot of sure we can keep the system operational and functioning. We've worked with the CDC on guidance for safety. But what we're seeing is people are still driving, and it's causing challenges to safety. We're seeing the number of fatalities is down, but the number of vehicle miles traveled is way down. So the proportion of fatalities on our roadways has gone up during the coronavirus and with everything going on now. And the nature of trips is changing. You have 30% more people working from home now than before, which is good. You're seeing that trips in a city under 100 miles are down, but trips by car over 100 miles per hour are up by a third. So people are still traveling, they're just traveling more regionally, and they're taking their cars there. So I think it's going to be important to get the public trust back in shared modes of transportation. I think that's key, and I think we'll get there. But if we're looking at what we should pay attention to, I mean, one of the examples that I think is easiest to understand is there is a major ride-sharing company that you all know that reported that rideshare was down 35% year over year. I think they lost $10.2 billion in expected revenue, gross bookings, than they had the year before, but their freight's way up, 113%. We're seeing freight on airlines is up. We're seeing that freight across the country on all systems is way up. And then if you think about, the investments we've seen in cold storage facilities for groceries, the amount of travel, I don't have the exact numbers, but the amount of people getting groceries delivered to their home, package delivery to their home, I mean, those numbers have skyrocketed through the roof. I mean, we're seeing generational change. People are getting their goods and services. And so to say freight as a technology is not really the right answer to your question, but making sure we're thinking through that, making sure we're thinking how can we use these driverless passenger vehicles or drones or things like that to deliver these goods to people in a way that people want, to give them the distance that they need at times, to protect them so they can still receive goods and still participate in the economy. I mean, this is important, and these are trends that will shape the way we see in the future. And even in the coming years, as we see riderships increase to get back to where they were before, it can take years. And I think that many people will change the way that they move themselves and receive goods for good. So we are preparing for those changes, and I think that's where people should be looking.
Finch, that's a fantastic answer. I will.
There. So I think one of the most interesting ways to actually think about this, and something that has really struck me since I've come over to Toyota, is not just that the research and the development and the learnings that we're getting from these advanced vehicle systems doesn't just have to apply to transportation. A lot of these learnings can apply to a whole host of other things. The machine learning and the artificial intelligence, the enhanced perception, and reasoning that can go into robotics or go into a lot of these different elements that aren't just solely cars, is really kind of something that just struck me as a new way of thinking about things, and the fleet learning and the different things that we can take that we're learning over here on the transportation side really can apply in other places. So I've mentioned earlier the Toyota Research Institute, and they are doing a lot of work on robotics and advanced robotics, and seeing how they're taking fleet learning, which they really you learn from the automated vehicle side, and now applying that to a fleet of robots is really interesting. I just thought was really cool, and something that I don't think policymakers have necessarily thought about as much, but I think is definitely worth thinking how we can leverage all of those learnings in a new way and in different industries.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, it's actually one that I've not really thought all that about either, but very important too if we're trying to be safer in a COVID environment and kind of address the various kind of labor challenges. So last but not least, I'll turn it over to Luke.
Absolutely. So following up on those thoughts from Finch and and Jamie there, when we think about the future of transportation, we talked about drones, and the drone is about this size and it flies this way, and urban air mobility, which is a helicopter or car that flies. But really, we have to think about going beyond that, where whether that's on the ground or in the air. And so we think about, for example, drones don't have to be just limited to this size, to a group one small drone, but the amount of technology out there, whether it's a small drone that fits in the palm of your hand, that's able to swarm out and collect mass amounts of information and data that can be used not just purely directly for transporting people or goods, but also collecting information that can use to help support transportation, to find out where there's traffic, what that activity looks like. All of these on the small side all the way to the large drones, where we're looking at drones that can carry giant cargo containers, right, that are tons and tons large. And so when we think about this, all of this technology grows out, whether it's that drone technology or our on the ground autonomous vehicles, talking about how that can then transfer into robotics, right? Going up not just throughout our warehouses, but up and down streets, delivering goods. We work with a number of companies that are focusing specifically on that. How do you enable a robot to go up to a house and deliver a package? All of these everything we're doing with drones and autonomous vehicles and urban air mobility fuels the next stages of transportation, which splinters out into all these areas. And all of that, the key to unlocking all of that is not just the technology themselves, the platform themselves, but what lies behind that. And that ultimately are those logistics that has to be put in place. How do we charge the vehicles? Where do they land? How do they take off? And then how is the public perceiving that? What is that public trust factor, right? If you have a robot going up to your house and dropping off a package, how do you know that that robot is coming from who it says it is? If that's going up and down the street, how do you feel that sense of trust when you see it? When you have a giant container ship that's hovering above your home, how do you have this sense of excitement that says, wow, that means my Amazon delivery is going to get here much faster, right? How do you see all the positive benefits, and how can we enable society as a whole to see all of the beautiful, absolutely unlocking capabilities that all these technologies offer, not just in their present iteration, but as we unleash them to fully be able to iterate and see all of those different niches that they can help fill, that right now we haven't even begun to think about, because we're still really in those early stages of a really exciting birth to the next wave of our transportation system.
Thank you, Luke. Yeah, a lot of great lessons to be learned from kind of the technologies today to the technologies and applications of tomorrow. So I don't see any specific questions, but I have one final question that I'm going to pose to both Luke and Jamie, and this kind of was prompted by what Finch was talking about the impacts of COVID on our transportation system. So, obviously we're, doing this event remotely. We would otherwise be doing it in person, of course, and obviously we've all been kind of impacted in various ways due to COVID. So I'm kind of curious about how your organization business has been impacted by COVID, and what are some of the major adjustments that you've had to make, and what are some of the ways that you're kind of contributing back to the community to help your community, your employees and consumers kind of adjust. So I'll start with Jamie.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, COVID certainly had a substantial impact on the auto industry and on Toyota. Our plants were shut down for several weeks. At the end of the day, our teammate safety, employee safety is the most important thing. And we really prioritize that. So, we've adjusted, the factories and the, sanitation efforts and shift turnover to try and, to make things safer for our teammates. But, we restarted the plants in mid-May and, are gradually getting back up to fill the pipeline. The demand for personal vehicles is certainly there. I think at the beginning of all this, I think we were all a little unsure on exactly what it meant for the industry and for many industries. But we've definitely seen the demand and the interest in people purchasing, personal vehicles. But we're getting back to normal. But of course, maintaining that safety of employees is priority number one.
Thank you, Jamie. Luke?
Yeah, for White Fox Defense, because we serve clients around the world and we have people, parts of our team stationed around the world, it definitely was a very immediate impact with travel restrictions. And so, as many small, medium-sized businesses, especially those that are working around the world and globally, it definitely creates an impact on ensuring that those people are safe and can operate within a wide variety of countries that all are taking different approaches to handling COVID. Within specifically the industry, we have seen a sharp increase in the demand for autonomous technology, specifically drones. And so, just as an example of that, and one of the case studies that's in this white paper that the chamber just released, is the U.S. Forest Service, who's typically uses manned aviation to fly over fires. Well, they have been transitioning to using more and more unmanned aviation assets such as drones, and in doing so, there's all this authorized drone use and manned aviation use, but at the same time, there's also reckless rogue drones that are flying in the airspace, and when they do that, they have to shut down all aviation, all authorized aviation, which means fires grow wildly rapidly as they're not able to fight the fire because there's a rogue drone in the area. And so White Fox, that's one example of where we've seen that increase in demand of autonomous technology, but also the increase of reckless and malicious use of unmanned technology, where the need to deploy systems to counter those technologies that are used unauthorized, to detect where the pilot is, to track the drone, and to ensure that only the authorized drones are flying in sensitive airspace is key. And we continue to see an increase of that as people go into this and adjust to the state of COVID and recognize that having unmanned aviation assets is a part of the future, and incorporating those into all facets across, whether it's in defense or in public safety or emergency response. Unmanned and autonomous technology is here to stay and is only going to have an increased relevance as we take these next steps into the exciting future that we're all creating.
Thanks, Luke. That's a great answer to help kind of wrap this up. I just wanted to kind of thank everyone for joining. Clearly, there's a lot. We covered a lot of ground today, from AVs, UAS, UAM. Hopefully, everyone found it helpful, and special thanks to Finch, Luke, and Jamie for joining and kind of providing their thoughts. If kind of CTEC and the chamber can be of any assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe and take care. Thank you all.
Thank you.